Hello and welcome to an episode of Historically Marked. I am Jason, just in front of the Uptown Square apartments, but before they were the Uptown Square apartments, they were called the Lauderdale Courts. It was once a housing project in Memphis, and at one time Elvis and his parents lived here. This was I think the second place they lived in upon moving to Memphis. I'll tell you more about it, and there's a historical marker here. So they originally lived at 572 Poplar Avenue, which is about, I'd say, 15-20 minute drive east. But they were sharing a room, but they also shared a house with, I think, 3 or 4 different families, and of course that was too much. And Vernon was so desperate to get the family out of there that he wanted to move the family to this housing project. So there is a two-sided marker here, and that interstate right there is Interstate 40. And then over there, if you can see it, that's the Bass Pro Shops pyramid that was once an arena. Looks like somebody forgot their shoes. All right, Lauderdale Courts. Built in 1936 by the Federal Emergency Administration of Public Works. Lauderdale Courts was one of the first federal housing projects in the nation. It replaced substandard housing with clean, modern dwellings for the poor. The courts were built along property adjoining Bayou Gayoso, which had been lined in concrete and covered by the extension of Lauderdale Street. Designed in the Georgian Revival style, the courts contained 449 apartments and buildings 1 to 3 stories high. Part of Market Street was converted to green space. Memphis Housing Authority, or the MHA, selected families based upon financial need. Conforming to the segregation laws of the time, only white families were considered for residency. In 2000, MHA renovated the courts into mixed-income housing under the Hope 6 program and renamed it as Uptown Square. Put up in 2015. And then it talks more about the Presleys living here on the other side. So Elvis Presley and his parents, Vernon and Gladys, lived at 185 Winchester, apartment 328, from October 1949 to January 1953. Former residents remember foremost that Elvis liked to sing and play guitar. He practiced in the basement and performed for neighbors on the front steps of his building. Elvis volunteered to sing at teenage dances in the recreation center. Johnny Burnett, founder of the rock and roll trio, sometimes refused to let Elvis perform. The Presleys moved in 1953 because their income exceeded the level allowed for project residents. Bill Black also lived in the courts, but he did not meet Elvis until they recorded together at Sun Records in 1954. For 3 years, Black and Scotty Moore were Elvis's original band members. All right, so I doubt that they'll even let me go in there, but I'll tell you a little bit about the Presleys. Now, the marker says October 1949, but in my notes, it says they moved in on May 1st, 1949. So it was a 3-story I-shaped building, which, yes, as you can tell, I can't really tell from the back, but I'm sure if I was in a plane, I could probably see it. But their apartment was in the middle section of the building on the ground floor. There was a small flight of steps that led to the building door, and once inside, their apartment was in the middle of the 3. And Elvis did have some hangouts here on this property, such as the Garden Square and a couple other places. Probably not for me to access anyway. But Elvis living here provided some stability for him, because before the family moved to Graceland later that decade, I mean, this was the longest time they've lived in a certain place, for almost 4 years, or well, for 4 years. So it was kind of a step up. I mean, it was definitely a step up for Elvis, and he was very appreciative of what his parents had done for him, despite of, you know, moving from town to town, place to place. And while they were living here, they had to make sure that everything was cleaned regularly and picked up, because yes, they would be inspected upon that. But that was no problem, because Gladys, even though she did work jobs while living here, she was a housekeeper in her own right, and everything stayed clean. But also, another worrisome aspect was, if you were making too much to live here, you were evicted. And that's exactly what happened when Vernon was making too much money. So they had to pretty much pack him and move someplace else. So after living here, there were 2 other places the Presleys lived at while they were in Memphis and before they moved to Graceland. One of them, the first one is 698 Safran's Avenue, and that is known as the lost address because, yeah, the place no longer exists anymore. It is now a vacant lot. And the one when Elvis was, you know, hanging out at Sun Records and Sun Studios, that was at 462 Alabama Avenue. So, just a little history on the living conditions and where the Presleys lived. And look, there's even a sign on that window. I know you can't see it, but it says the king has left the building. So obviously one of the tenants knows the history of this nice fine building. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Historically Marked. I am Jason, just outside the former Lauderdale Courts where the Presleys lived in Memphis, Tennessee. Signing off.